am going to introduce our guest this evening. And we have a great topic for you tonight. We are going to be talking about culturally responsive leadership. And I'm actually personally very interested in this as part of a grant I'm doing. But tonight, Dr. Erinn Floyd is joining us. She is a gifted education, diversity, equity, and inclusion scholar, the director of training and partnership development for the Consortium of Inclusion of Underrepresented Racial Groups in Gifted Education. She's a former director of professional learning at NAGC and gifted education director for the Alabama Department of Education. She has over 28 years of experience as a classroom teacher, gifted in school improvement specialist, literacy coach, district gifted coordinator, and school administrator. She is an inaugural recipient of the NAGC Dr. Mary Fraser Teacher Scholarship for Diverse Talent Development. Dr. Floyd is founder of Equity and Excellence in Education, LLC, which provides professional learning and academic support to educators and students. So I had to read her entire bio because I was so impressed by it. And I think she comes from such a wealth of background and expertise. I can't wait to hear from you, Dr. Floyd, tonight. So I want to welcome you. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me and for such a beautiful introduction. And as has been stated, yes, this is a sad day in Colorado, especially, but around the world. And my heart goes out to all of you there. You will be in my prayers. It gives me great pleasure to be with CAGT. I have such a special place in my heart for CAGT. So thank you for this opportunity to share with you tonight. So without further ado, I will share my screen and we'll get started. Can you see it okay? Wonderful. So I'd love to inspire any and all of you watching to understand how cultural responsiveness shapes what we do in our roles in education. And of course, we all advocate for students, but how about advocating from a cultural lens with respect to providing resources that certain students from certain populations don't have? And then of course, just dismantle those things that stand in the way of marginalized students having what they need to reach their true potential. So marginalized populations, what are we talking about? Well, these would be students who have experienced some type of discrimination or they've been excluded from gifted programs. These barriers are placed and based on power and where it's unequal based on the students' backgrounds, their families, their resources. And of course, they're always based in some economic, political, or social, even cultural dimension. These students, if you ever had a moment, would say they've been ostracized or harassed or persecuted even. Some who know they have talent, but have not been included in gifted program identification processes, or if included, certainly not identified and considered worthy of participation in the gifted education program. And we all know there are racial disparities and inequities within gifted education programs across the United States. So tonight we're talking about students from marginalized populations, which includes Black and Hispanic or Latinx students. So key challenges and barriers that we face in education, as was mentioned, the access to equity for students from certain populations and backgrounds, races, cultures, ethnicities. We understand that there is lack of access to actual gifted and talented education programs with respect to the identification all the way through assessment and placement procedures. There are issues with sustained intervention. If students from these populations ever make it into the program, how well are they served, or how much of their background is appreciated, nurtured, and supported such that they retain membership and participation in these programs? And unfortunately, there are deficit-based approaches to instruction, just even in the general education classroom, but that's where our gifted education babies sit. So they need to be appreciated wherever they go. And it takes special work to be able to do that well. More challenges. There's a lack of professional learning for educators, especially with respect to culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally responsive leadership. There are certain strategies that must be in place every day to support these students. And if you think about the assessments that any school district employs for the gifted education identification process, are they equitable? Most times they're not. Typically it's what's easy to administer, what is less expensive for the district. And too many times districts do not use a multiple criteria approach. It's all most often single criteria. And there are more districts going to multiple criteria, but using more than one item to determine placement is helpful for students who come from certain backgrounds. Persistent systemic issues, again, Black, Latinx, and of course the poverty piece is huge. Low SES students are typically underrepresented in gifted and advanced programs, and this is a nationwide issue. Latinx students are much less likely for gifted services than their white peers, even if they have the same abilities, even if they're just as capable of performing at the same level. Typically, they're not referred at the same rate as their white counterparts. And there are disproportionate numbers of students of color assigned to poorly resourced schools. They don't have the materials or the technology or the staff. And often the staff aren't trained in gifted education protocol, don't have the certification. So giftedness just kind of goes to the side, and it's not considered something that should be a focus for students who are in these schools. And we all know that the majority of classroom teachers are middle-class white females, which tends to perpetuate a cultural mismatch between teachers and students. It just happens. It just is. But there's a way to help turn it around and be a little bit more culturally matched with just a little bit of training, practice, and intention on the part of the educators. And unfortunately, funding is an issue with gifted education. There's no federal mandate for it. State level funding varies, and there are even some states considering ending gifted education programs, which is a detriment to any student. So let's look at some data snapshots. So of course I pulled Colorado's data. You probably have it and see it, but I wanted to highlight the discrepancies with respect to race and ethnicity with gifted education. So if you look at Latino and Hispanic students, the dark green represents the gifted percentage of students. And of course, the lighter green is all of the students in K-12 in the state. It appears that there are quite a few, there's so many fewer students in the gifted program with respect to the percentage of students actually in the schools in the state. On the flip side of that, and to the contrary, if you look at the white students, I've highlighted just these two for the purposes of this presentation. It looks as if there are more white students in the gifted program than there are even in the schools. The percentage is much greater. And you'll find that in just about most of the states that you look at, there's an overrepresentation of white students in gifted over the total enrollment in just the general schools. And the flip side of that with students from Black and Latino, Hispanic backgrounds, and even American Indian have fewer students represented in the gifted education program. And just to support this a little bit more, this is from a national report, Access Denied, from Dr. Marcia Gentry and Dr. Gilman Whiting and some other researchers who decided to share state by state information regarding representation by race of students in gifted education program across the board with general education enrollment. And as you can see, it supports that there are fewer students who are from Black or even Indigenous or Latino backgrounds, Latinx backgrounds, who are in gifted education programs, but they're in the schools. But you don't see that with white students. More of them are identified gifted than are in the school, it seems. There's a link that should be available to you to this report if you'd like to read it further. I wouldn't dare try to unpack this, but it's wonderful information. There's even a piece about missingness, which means the students are there who are highly capable of placement in programs, but they're not referred, they're not identified. And there are ways to counteract that. What are the next steps if you find that this happens in your neck of the woods? So you have to think about the barriers. How do we address them? We know what they are. How do we make it more equitable and accessible for marginalized students? Well, think about local norms. Some people are probably using them who are within the sound of my voice right now, but they're very helpful, especially in areas where students are already attending, say, neighborhood schools, or they're in school districts with similar income or race or ethnicity. So by comparing them to each other with similar, fair and equitable backgrounds and experiences, then you might actually find that there's some talent in your building. You're identifying talent everywhere, and it's based on that local norm, if you will, of the students that you're comparing. You're not comparing students with unlike backgrounds and experiences where you would see a discrepancy, and of course, a discrepancy in the numbers that are actually placed in programs. I've mentioned multiple criteria. You know, you could have a talent portfolio. There could be observations of the students. There might be a rating scale on, say, the 10 tabs. Even Dr. Mary Frazier's work is very helpful in identifying students from special populations. And of course, universal screening helps to cast a wider net among students who are actually gifted and who are not placed in programs because the gifted behaviors that they manifest or demonstrate aren't considered gifted. It's different, and most traditional cultures or white based experiences don't consider certain aspects as gifted because they're so different. It doesn't mean they're not. It just means that they are different and maybe unfamiliar, but could potentially be considered gifted if the educator who's observing the student is able to view them from a strengths-based background as opposed to deficit-based, because it's different and unknown and not traditionally associated with gifted. Of course, we must always model respect for equity, diversity, and inclusiveness. We must think of others and be respectful of the differences and welcoming to learning more about them. It's always a great idea for a district to have an equity plan. And of course, if you have the plan, the people that help contribute to what's in it should represent the district that it's serving. In addition to that, always audit it. Make sure that what you've put in place is working. Revisit it from time to time to make sure that what you thought was a good idea is actually working. You've got the representative sample of stakeholders. So refer to those individuals that you've invited to serve on the committee, to advocate for equity in your gifted education program, and just do a random check to make sure that it's working. And if not, it's fine to adjust it. It's your plan. It changes with the needs of the students within the district. Of course, we have to develop cultural competency. We need individuals who understand differences, who understand ethnicities and how they are represented from different students. We need to make sure that we've gone from a place of, well, I know that we're different, and I appreciate the difference beyond a random celebration because it's a particular holiday, but I'm competent in that I'm able to understand the cultural differences while appreciating, even though they're different. And of course, there's culturally responsive leadership. There are persons in places of leadership, building level principal, school district directors, superintendents, state level leaders. Culturally responsive leadership means I'm in a place of leadership. And while I have all these roles that I must play in my job, one of them should include being culturally responsive and ensuring that all of those persons who are under my leadership, under my direction, are encouraged, i.e. required, to demonstrate cultural competency and cultural responsiveness in instruction, in communication with parents, being inclusive of others and different groups. Further, culturally responsive leaders promote school vision and climate. In any given school, there are different students. Are we thinking of all of the students when we create our mission statement or our plan for how we will deliver instruction or after school programs? Are we thinking of everyone at the time. How about the students who are from marginalized contexts? Even if they're a smaller group, they should not be discounted. Think of them when devising activities, encouraging teachers' lesson plans to be more inclusive. Am I visible? Am I present? Am I developing relationships with the parents of the students? Am I inviting them in? Do they feel welcome here? How about community leaders and stakeholders who are around the school, who would be welcome to come in and representative of the respective population so that students can see people who look like them in leadership roles, assisting the school, coming in to work with the school leaders? And is there professional learning provided at the school or within the district so that everyone, all members of the staff, educators, even custodial staff, everyone should be a part of this cultural appreciation? And with respect to the curriculum, is it inclusive to marginalized minority students? So on a continuum of cultural competency, and some of this is from the work of Dr. Tracy Cross, I mentioned being aware and then, having the knowledge and then being actually competent with respect to cultural appreciation. So I understand that there's some differences and, there's some similarities across the board. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But take it a step further, am I understanding the nuances of the culture and that there are certain norms and values and traditions that are different from mine, but I recognize that they're there and I understand that they're very important to the respective groups. But am I at a place now where I can integrate it into my work? Am I able to include in a lesson plan, in an activity, in a school program, any of this cultural knowledge? Am I inviting students and parents from the respective cultures to share on the program? Am I including it as a district leader in the plan for gifted education, or inviting them to have conversations that will inform our policies and even better, our practices on a daily, regular basis? So to ensure equity, there are several things that leaders should do. Of course, dismantle any biased policies and practices. Take a moment in the daily hustle and bustle of the work that you do on a regular basis. Read it, have others read it. Is there anything I'm missing? Is there something that we could do to improve it? Should we add a sentence, take out a sentence, change a word? Are we inclusive of everyone? And is it just written down and handed out and put on a shelf? Or are we actually including it in our daily work? Are we doing what we say we're going to do? And I'm going to pause here for a moment just to add this tidbit. Unfortunately, we all know almost a year ago now, what changed the face of the issues with respect to race, what we witnessed on TV in the murder of George Floyd. And from that, schools and districts and organizations and agencies have all penned these beautiful anti-racist statements. They're on websites, they're in handbooks, and they're on the walls if you go in businesses. But actually step back and ask yourself, as a patron, as a member, as a leader, is what I see written actually happening? Am I, is this organization actually doing the work, or are they saying the words that we need to hear or that they think we want to hear so that the pressure is off? So really delve deeper beyond a written statement, but start there. So, of course, where possible, increase the diversity of the person serving the students. There should be Black and Brown administrators and educators. Where possible, if you're recruiting and no one shows up that looks like the students you're serving, reach out to places where there are graduates of programs. Historically Black colleges and universities have graduates every year that are looking for a job. Hispanic speaking institutions have the same. So reach out to help increase the diversity of the pool of educators among your ranks. Of course, we all need this gifted training. There are gen ed teachers who still struggle with how to serve gifted students in their classrooms. So they would need training on special populations and gifted. They would need help with observations of students during the second grade child find screening process. Additionally, culturally responsive techniques and pedagogy and leadership practices should be available to all educators. You never know what leader you are grooming, and culturally responsive pedagogy should be a part of what you do every day anyway. Include that in your faculty meetings, in your institute service, in-service sessions that you have at the end or beginning of the school year. And of course, while we don't have it, we should always advocate for federal mandates for gifted and increased funding. We could all use it everywhere. I won't get any arguments there, I'm sure. And of course, parental engagement. Again, I've shared, parents from certain cultures don't feel comfortable in schools. It could be because of their own experiences as students. It could be even experiences they've had as parents of their children, maybe in another school than from yours, or maybe things they've heard their child come home and say. And any and all of it may be, viable, or it could be just based on perception. So don't allow perceptions to keep anyone from being comfortable, even educators being comfortable to have parents come in or to call them. And don't wait to just call when something's going wrong with the student. Call to give what I call a glowing report that helps break down barriers with communication with parents. And if there's a translator needed, contact the ESL, ELL teacher or any experts in the community who could help break down that communication and language barrier that may exist between parents and the school staff. And again, I've mentioned the equity audits. Those should be ongoing, even annually would be great. And then of course, where possible, the gifted program, gifted and talented education program should be monitored. Most state departments of education provide this, and especially where in the state gifted is a mandate. And use that monitoring process to help you improve your practice and increase the equitable nature of your policies. It's even if it's not the time for your compliance monitoring visit, reach out to your State Department staff because they're there to help you, and it only improves your program practices. Further support of equitable programs, of course, racially, culturally, ethnically, linguistically different students are in every classroom, everywhere. There's so many teachers who are not prepared to deal with the challenges that are faced. There are graduates of pre-service teacher programs who walk out of the college building and into the school building and they're not ready. It's not their fault, but we need more pre-service programs to include diversity, equity, and actual immersion experiences for their students so that they're better prepared when they enter the classrooms because they don't know where they're going to work. Some of them are not prepared for the classrooms that they end up serving in. And then of course, the perspectives of educators. While we can't necessarily change minds, we can inform the views and perceptions of the educators who serve our students. There are times when teachers think that culturally responsive pedagogy means celebrating Cinco de Mayo. It does not. There's more to students than one celebration. There's more, which many of that background don't consider a holiday or even celebrate. And when we think that we are doing the right thing, sometimes we're not. It's okay to ask, and it's even better to ask the people who represent the culture that you're trying to celebrate. What works? It's okay to talk about it. That's another thing. This whole tough conversations and courageous conversations that people are afraid to have where race is concerned. We don't get better at it if we're not talking about it with the people who can give us the right information. So a results-driven approach. Again, there's the leadership, the curriculum, and the instruction piece where cultural responsiveness is concerned. Got to talk about it. Talk to the right people. Parents are involved, teachers are involved, leaders should be involved. Everyone should be around the table discussing how can we include culturally responsive pedagogy? What does it look like? I hear it, and I know it's a thing, but what does it look like in my classroom? Ask the questions. Cultural competence training must happen for everyone. Just like we have to talk about the new standard that's coming out or the new assessment or, where classroom management is concerned, there's EdTPA requirements, there's, everything that teachers must do. Why not add this to it? it's before our very eyes anyway. The students who we're serving need our support. Then with respect to curriculum, are there textbooks with students, pictures, and people who look like them? You have a classroom full of brown faces and there's not a brown face in the book that they're looking at. They need to be able to connect with the lessons and the activities, the stories that are in the reading book. You know, do they include vocabulary that is foreign to your students, or can they relate? Again, conduct an equity audit. I know this is the textbook adoption year, or maybe it's not. We have to wait 2 more years before we can get rid of this book, but guess what? You can bring in extra books. You can ask the students to share stories, even have the family members come in and share experiences, or record it. We're virtual, most of us. There's a way to make it happen, even if it's not the time to get new textbooks. You can Google stories. On your classroom walls, do you have pictures that are inclusive of other cultures? Are you allowing children to share historical experiences that their family may have had that aren't common knowledge to their classmates? This also builds positive relationships among students in the classroom who are different from each other. And with respect to instruction, are we as educators actually critically self-reflecting on our work, our practice? Are we asking ourselves, how am I coming across to my students? Am I differentiating because RTI says to, and not thinking of the rigor and relevance that even a student who may not have been identified gifted can handle? Is it because it's not traditionally discussed, where there are differences beyond what this RTI says? Am I thinking of, well, gosh, when I used some pretty big words, Joaquin understood what I said, even though he's struggling with, the English language. Make connections where there otherwise might not be, and start looking and what I call being on a scavenger hunt for giftedness where it may not otherwise be considered even possible. And of course, create an action plan, even for the student who otherwise has been overlooked for giftedness, to say, let me start my own plan of observation for him or her. What am I noticing that might inform the gifted specialist when he or she comes around the process for giftedness? If we're actually casting that wide net, here's some information, some anecdotal information that may inform what's already being collected for students. Take the initiative. So professional learning opportunities for educators. Again, we have to be intentional. We have to make sure that while we know educators are at different levels as our students, we have to provide pre-service and in-service preparation for everyone. Any professional learning opportunity is a cornerstone for improved practice. Wherever you are, there are teachers, well, I've always done it this way. I've been in education 35 years, and this is the same lesson plan I had my second year. And well, ma'am, it's time to switch it up. And it's okay for someone to show you a different way to even use the same thing, but let's just step it up a little bit. Be receptive, educators. And professional learning must embrace that racial, cultural, ethnic, linguistic difference among students. We have to include in the plans that we provide for teachers and the template. Is there not just a space that says you have a diversity initiative? What is it? We don't want to write it for the sake of writing it, just to say we've done it. What does it look like? Am I really doing it the right way? I learned through professional learning opportunities a better way to do it that is more inclusive. And of course, students and adults benefit from professional learning of educators. There are more opportunities where there's a deeper appreciation for cultural differences. There's a way for us to embrace differences in a way that doesn't come across as rote or required, but actually received well and appreciated and implemented appropriately. So I'd like to share this as a paradigm shift, going from a surface model to a social justice model. So you have equality. Of course, that means equal. And most people think, well, if I've got equal covered, then I'm good. Well, not necessarily. You want to go beyond equal to equity. On the surface, equal, it works. But equity means that even though we might start out at everybody doesn't start out at the same place. So some will require more than others and something different. So if it means going an extra step for students who didn't start at the same place, then that's what we must do. If you recognize that you have at-risk students, you just identified they're at risk, they're on free and reduced or reduced lunch, their parents aren't working, you know, they typically come to school and their hair isn't combed, or they may not be groomed the best, surface level. But social justice says this system is broken. What can I do about it? It doesn't mean, you know, you have to take on every child's home life issues, but acknowledging that they're not on the level playing field, and that there may be resources available to that family that you might link that child's family to. There may be something that you can do in your classroom or in your school to support students that are at risk beyond just saying, I know that they're at risk. Okay, so colorblindness. There are teachers who say, oh, I don't see color. Very well-meaning. And I even had an older educator share with me very openly, and I appreciate it so much, that there was a time when, as a white educator, she was going through, you know, school and learning about being an educator, especially in diverse schools. They were taught not to see color. A whole generation, several generations of educators who were actually taught that. So I'm happy to share that that's not a good thing, and that while very well-meaning and intentionally, you know, hopeful of making it a better situation, ladies and gentlemen, from today forward, March 23rd, 2021, don't say that. Let me tell you why. If you don't see color, you don't see that child's culture and race and ethnicity. You must see who that child really is. And part of seeing who the child is means I see a Hispanic student, I see a Black child. You have to see it. It doesn't mean because you see the race and you say that you see the race that you are less than welcoming to understanding more about that child, or that you're coming from a biased place. It does not. It's okay. You heard it from me to say, you see the race. If you leave this presentation, someone asks, well, who presented CWC tonight? If you don't say a Black female, you know, light-skinned Black woman, or if you don't say that, then you haven't described Dr. Erinn Floyd, and I won't be offended if you say it. And again, going beyond the surface to self-examination. Am I actually really recognizing that I see a difference? I can talk about it. I don't feel a certain way about it. And I don't feel guilty that because I'm mentioning race, the person on the other end of this conversation or description feels a certain way. It's all in how you approach it. Learning about other cultures, I'll just learn, you know, the basics. There's Black History Month. I know about Rosa Parks. I know about Dr. King. But am I dismantling systems of power? If I see something, I'm going to say something. Not that you have to carry the banner of the Black Lives Matter movement, but that you recognize somewhere along the way something went wrong, and it doesn't have to stay that way. Am I celebrating diversity with the stereotypical celebrations, or am I advocating and fighting equity? Am I helping to make sure that things are more equitable for the students I serve, for maybe the neighbors I live by, or some of the parents who come to the classroom who have an issue that they have no clue where to begin solving? Are you helping? Well, this is an avenue. Here's an expert that helps with that. Or I can connect you with someone who may know. I don't know, but I understand it's an issue, and I'm more than happy to connect you with someone who can help you. Are we focusing on intent on that surface side, or impact? What difference can I really make? Should I make? Am I willing to make? Or have I made on the social justice model side? So we're moving from words to actions. You know, there's the ideology and the practices. Are we being inclusive? Are we having those conversations that are typically tough, that most people don't want to have, don't know how to have, but should have? Are we really moving from just the awareness to the competence piece with respect to cultural competence? Are our practices culturally relevant beyond the surface? Am I including in my lesson ways that my students know I appreciate who they are? And I recognize that though we're different, we can still learn from each other and show appreciation for each other. Am I giving them an opportunity to have a voice? Am I listening? Is my leader helping me be more culturally responsive? Have they done the work to be self-reflective? Is there a district-wide stance on diversity, equity, and inclusion? Again, beyond a policy, is it implemented in practices? Can I see a difference? Is there a difference in what we did last year and this year, just based on what's happened all around us? Even with the pandemic, there are students who don't have access to the internet if they're virtual. I know of a school district right here in Alabama it's rural. The district has so many students of all races who are poor, who don't have the internet. The district leadership placed school buses equipped with Wi-Fi so the students could use the Chromebooks that this district issued while at home to be able to have instruction. That's a stance to be inclusive, considerate. Where possible, again, is there diverse staffing at every level, from the superintendent down? Are there people who look like the students in your buildings that they can actually relate to and look up to and say, I can do that one day, or this person understands my experiences and is something that I can appreciate as a student of color, as a poor student, and aspiring to that role in my life one day. And of course, we all want to see increased racial equity in gifted programs. What are you doing with your identification practices? How do we change the numbers? Are we using the assessment because it's inexpensive? Are we using it because it's quick to give and I could just do a lot of students at one time? Is it because it's what we've always done? Or are we sitting back saying, wait a minute, we've used this test, however many years, and we're seeing the same numbers? Are we using multiple criteria? Are we asking the people in the community who know those students' strengths to maybe give share a narrative? Or are we looking? I remember as a gifted specialist walking down the hallway of a school, and I was having so much trouble getting authentic products from students. There was a time many eons ago, I'm not going to age myself, where teachers would actually send worksheets, like from a math book or language arts workbook. No, ma'am, can't have that. That doesn't show giftedness. So I ended up, fast forward a few years, walking in a building, still struggling after having gotten them off the worksheets with what to share as products during the multiple criteria search, I call it. And I'd see these just authentic and elaborate models that the kids had made just on one grade level. And I stopped in my track and I would point out to, some and ask the teachers, like, whose work is this? And of course, there were students who had not been identified or, referred for the gifted program. And I said, I need a picture of this. I need to know who did this. How can we include this child in? Have you noticed certain things in the classroom? Has he or she said it? You'd be surprised at the number of students who became included in that search for second grade child find screening and eventually referred for gifted who placed, who otherwise would have been overlooked. So we have to look in different places to help increase racial equity in our gifted education programs. And again, always considerate of the neurodivergent students, those who may be twice exceptional. There are people who don't think a gifted child can also have a reading disability or be hearing impaired, or even 3E with respect to race and ethnicity of Hispanic students who are also gifted, who may also have a disability, learning disability. Those students need just as much consideration as all the others. We must always come from an inclusive place with respect to being culturally aware of any differences, and of course, including respect for disabilities alongside a gifted student ability. So I always like to say, if we're really doing the work, we have to find comfort in discomfort. And sometimes we have to jump out of the water, not to our death, but just jump out of the water to have conversations, to take a chance to explore new ways of thinking and doing. It's great to come back in, but sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone and be brave and do the right thing, where difference and culture and race and ethnicity and social justice and inclusion are concerned. I'm always happy to have this conversation. And I have often been put in the position of saying the things that other people can't say. And it's because I'm a brown girl and I can say brown girl things, but I want everyone to be able to have a conversation. I don't want to be the one that has to speak because I've had the experience, but I do want you to recognize that because I've had the experience, I can speak. And to call on people who have had the experiences, are not always positive, to help bridge the gap and hold conversations that we need to have for the children who sit in our classrooms, who need all of us, all of you, to help them reach their highest potential. I'm so excited about this conversation tonight. I look forward to more with you. I'm excited about future opportunities with colleagues in Colorado. I've been very well received. I came maybe 2 years ago now, and I'd like to, pull on my collar to say that I was very instrumental in NAGC's convention coming there this year, I should say. So I'm just very intrigued by the work that Nanette Jones does there and all of her team. They're just amazing. And I know that you are doing great things. I want to share too, from the report that I mentioned earlier, Access Denied, Colorado did very well in the report in terms of having a mandated gifted program, the identification and services piece, and even a partially funded program. There's always work to do. There's always a better grade to make, but at least where you are able to do some things you are. So kudos to all the educators there. Continue to do the work and call on me anytime if you need me to assist you with any of your efforts. This is my LLC, Equity and Excellence in Education, E3 for short. And I'll leave this up for a few moments if you'd like to get some contact information off of it, but I'm very excited that I've actually done some presentations for schools and districts and even state departments of education. And these are some of the topics listed here, but anything that you need help with, feel free to reach out to me. This is not a shameless plug, but I'm so excited and proud that I've actually created this LLC. It came out of necessity. And I look forward to collaborating with educators across the US and beyond to help make a difference for all of our children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I took so many notes. I always do, but this is something that's been a real part of my journey as a gifted educator. I don't know if you know, Colorado's been the recipient of 2 Javits grants focusing on underrepresentation in rural populations, and my district has been a participant in both of those grants. So I've been doing this work, trying to make some headway, and it doesn't happen overnight. I wish it did. But it requires a lot of work, and teacher turnover is huge. So I think it really hit home to me that teacher training, and I knew that, but I was thinking about it as you were talking and thinking, gosh, that every single year, we can't just do it 1 or 2 or 3 years and then say we did that and our district's been trained, because our staffing turnover is so great. Even for leadership turnover is not. Our staffing turnover is. I think that's a huge point to make. I really appreciated what you had to share tonight. And I want to say I appreciate too that you define some of these terms. And I think that when we're talking about this systemic issues, without having those clear definitions, when you defined awareness, knowledge, and competency and the difference between the 3, that's huge. Because I'd like to say I'm aware and I'm working on the knowledge, but that competency piece is where we have to get to work.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And again, because has been such a touchy subject, and to everyone's credit, you don't know what to ask. You don't know where to begin. And if you're offending someone by asking, you're not offending me by asking. If you say, I am so clueless, I don't even know where to begin, like what do ask? That's how we get better. It's only when people are hesitant to even talk about it that you can't make any progress. So you're right. Knowing the difference and where you fall on that continuum is where you begin the work, as with anything.
Yeah. And I never looked at it from that perspective. So I appreciate that. And this is a big part of the grant that I'm doing, is this work in this culturally responsive leadership. And I feel like I've got lots of work to do, but I appreciate it. We're going to wait for some questions to roll in. We always have questions, but sometimes it takes a little while for people to kind of formulate what they're going to say. So I have plenty to say. I always do. Nanette will tell you that. Nanette's like, oh, no worries. Randy,
I'm going to slide one more time, and there's another. This is my email address and the
perfect.
LLC and the Twitter handle if anyone wants to reach out to me there. This is the last slide I have, but
I need to follow you on Twitter.
Yes.
Now that I have your handle there, I also need to tell you, while we're waiting maybe for some questions to come in, is that I liked your distinction between the surface and the social justice model. Again, like I feel like you did a great job of really calling out some clarity on what does it really look like to be culturally responsive, and what is it sometimes when people like virtue signal, that, oh, we're doing culturally responsive teaching. I don't see color, and we do all kinds of learning about other cultures in our social studies curriculum. But when you say that, then you put one culture above the other and say that we're learning about other cultures, because all the rest of the time we're worried about our culture.
Exactly.
And I think I had so many ahas, and I like copied the entire chart down, and I'm going to go through it and like really. So I appreciate that distinction. We do have some questions.
Okay.
People always searching for curriculums and programs and resources. What do you have any insight into good programs? Like I'm thinking like literacy curriculum, other curriculum that you might recommend?
So not curriculum, I would say off the top, but definitely references for doing the work. Doctors Trotman Scott, Michelle Fraser Trotman Scott, and Dr. Donna Ford have done a lot of work with, I don't know if people are familiar with the Bloom-Banks model, but it is applicable to any curriculum because it helps teachers frame their immersion into cultural appreciation and diversity within a classroom, and how to actually see where they fall as educators on it, and then how to apply lessons in such a way that they're delving and getting closer to that competency level. So I can share that after with you, that you can share with educators. That's one. Awesome. And then in terms of culturally responsive leadership, Dr. Khalifa has a great resource. I'm going to write this down so that I can share that information as well, because I think it would at least frame a beginning for educators and leaders on even the conversations with staff about how to approach any piece of the content area, any curriculum. But in terms of just a program, a literacy or math, no. But again, if you've got the toolkit, if you've got the framework, you can apply it to any adopted text that you have, because it's about
Dr. Joy's done some work with the mirror books and talking about having our students reflected in the literature that they read.
Oh, of course, yes. Yes.
We do have another question here, and I think this is an excellent question. And you've probably working with Department of Ed in Alabama and through NAGC. We get grants, and like I said, my district's been a recipient of them too. And then from your perspective, how could you create sustainable action after the grant monies are gone? What are some maybe tips that you have to help keep the work going once the funds are gone?
So money, money talks. I do understand that. And having the grant is wonderful, but of course it doesn't last forever. So dependent upon the relationships and partnerships built, if it's included as part of the grant, say a university partnership, typically universities have a little bit more money than school districts. And then when that grant money runs out, maybe sustaining some of those partnerships or building into it as, in such a way that maybe there's funding on the university side or the agency side, or maybe even corporations. I don't know who all may have been involved in a particular grant, but for instance, building relationships and partnerships that can continue, because then, the universities also have grants. They also have monies available to support after school programs, summer school programs. That would be a way to make it as sustainable as possible. Maybe a corporation would match some funds, results of the grant. Maybe there are some organizations who are willing to support the program beyond the grant cycle. Of course, you want to write for the grant again. You may or may not get it, unfortunately, but there's always showing what you've done helps people with money. You got to reach out to people, some philanthropists, you got to find them, they're out there. And even corporations like Apple or Google, Microsoft, reaching out to Target or, other grant sources that may not be as large as Javits, but at least will help in the interim to sustain some of the things, and maybe kind of tweaking what the actual overall grant did and using the manageable, sustainable pieces that may cost less to continue for students. Beyond that, I don't know.
I think one thing I've learned to maybe leverage a little bit is if you're working on these culturally responsive teaching, you're working on increasing equity, there are other fund pockets in your district. We can't just live in silos, right? So there are other fund pockets in your district that you can partner with in helping meet some of those same goals that aren't just for gifted.
Well, you bring to mind federal program directors who have the pots of money, right? They're earmarked. But ESSA said, we've got to train educators of gifted students. So guess what? While it may not be a federal mandate for the gifted program directly, there are teachers of the gifted that are general ed teachers. They need to be trained. That's a pool of money. So now that it's March, start talking to your federal programs folks about that money for next year. Can you put aside some money that will include professional learning opportunities, especially with respect to culturally responsive leadership and pedagogy and practice? Can we just set aside some, or at least earmark some, so we can serve all educators, not just gifted, because they'll say, no, that's federal money, can't use it for gifted. Well, guess what? We all touch advanced students. And ESSA says, use the professional learning that, the Title II especially, but the Title dollars for your staff. So that would be a great place to think about how to extend some programs, or at least provide training that may not have been included in a grant.
I hope that answered Rebecca's question. I know there's things like busing and that kind of stuff are just something to get kids to programs and get them to and from charter or magnet programs.
Oh, yeah.
How do we sustain that? So I hope that Rebecca, that kind of helped with some ideas on creatively accessing funds and getting people involved. And I think, again, that building those partnerships with families, just like you said, in culturally responsive leadership, and really growing that communication with families, then also, building those partnerships with community, corporations, businesses, philanthropists. It's huge. I think there's people out there who want to spend some money towards something that they find important and valuable in education, but aren't always sure who to talk to.
And I know that two things that come to mind. So depending on where you are, there are companies, maybe a busing company, who would like to make a donation to the school system. Again, it depends on where you live, but you have to be creative in finding funding. So depending on what the need is, search in your area a little bit further than your immediate area to see if there is a service provider who is willing to contribute to the program or the plan that you have in place to sustain it. Secondly, there are sororities and fraternities in areas who can provide in-kind service. You know, many of them are very well steeped in public service. So they might be willing to come and lend a hand if it's a program that, you know, that they won't be paid for, but they're willing to support maybe tutoring or some after school activities. And then thirdly, while the JAVITS is a great grant and, you know, they provide great funding, everybody can't get it. And, you know, people think that's the only grant out there because it's specifically for gifted and special populations. But if you go on the government's website, there's tons of grants that could apply to your particular student demographic, your needs, you know, programs. So take the time when, I know teachers don't have a lot of it, but where you can find the opportunity to just Google grants, and you'd be surprised. I've Googled and the list just went on and on and on. You know, people think of JAVITS because it's the most popular one.
Yeah.
And it may not have to be a gifted specific grant, but there's a need that you have that will be matched in a grant on that list. There's an exhaustive list. So Google grants, you know, that might help at least sustain remnants of a program you have in place once those funds deplete.
Absolutely. And you know, like the worst thing that could happen, right, is you ask and people say no.
They say no, but somebody will say yes.
And sometimes they say yes. And you know, if they say no, you just move on to the next person. Right. So I need to wrap up because it's the end of the evening, but I did want to say, I really appreciate finding comfort in discomfort. And I think that if we're going to make things change for our students and for our communities, I think that we do have to get comfortable being uncomfortable a little bit and asking the tricky questions, you know, with the best of intentions, and then, you know, moving from that intent to impact and how we want to make an impact. Yes. I absolutely appreciate your time tonight. Rebecca says, thank you for the ideas, just great ideas.
You're welcome.
I appreciate everything. Like I said, I took so many notes that I need some time to kind of reflect on. But we have next Tuesday, we have Dr. Nicole Tatro, and she is going to be presenting on insight into bright minds, the latest in neuroscience and twice exceptionality. Mm. So that could be another, we always have such great topics. I always feel like, thank goodness we record these and put them on our website at coloradogifted.org so everybody can access them. But I appreciate your time tonight, Dr. Floyd, and I appreciate everybody for tuning in. You know, be kind to each other. It's a tough time out there right now, and I think hug some loved ones tonight, and we'll see you next week.
Everyone take care. Thank you, Randy and Annette, for an awesome evening. Everyone be safe. Take care. Bye-bye.